I slammed the truck door shut so hard the side mirror rattled, dust rising under my boots as I stared at the gleaming metal gate blocking my own driveway. A fresh chain with a triple lock system clamped it shut like the entrance to a military base. But this wasn't the army. This was my property, my land. And standing there like she'd just conquered Rome was Karen Penwell, HOA president, smug as ever with a clipboard in one hand and a smug grin that stretched wider than the gate itself. I hadn't been home more than 10 minutes since returning from the off-road rally in Arizona, and already my blood pressure was rising. She pointed to a laminated sign on the gate. Private HOA access only. The same access road I paved with my own money 10 years ago. The one leading to my home, my garage, and most importantly, Goliath, my custom-built, competition-grade monster truck. Karen gave me a cheery wave like this was a neighborhood bake sale and not a hostile takeover. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just some petty HOA stunt. This was war. And Karen had just locked horns with the wrong guy. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to process the insanity. While I'd been in the desert crushing scrap cars and signing posters, the HOA had apparently held an emergency vote to install a massive gate across the shared access road that I had exclusive deeded rights to. Not only was I locked out of my own land, but Karen had taken it upon herself to weaponize the HOA's bloated sense of authority against me personally. When I finally broke the silence and asked her what the hell was going on, she tapped the clipboard and said I had violated Article 6, Section 3 of the HOA guidelines by leaving an unsightly industrial vehicle visible from the road. She was referring to Goliath, of course. A beast of a machine with tires taller than most sedans and a paint job that turned heads. I built her from the ground up, every nut and bolt tuned to perfection. Karen had always hated it, claimed it lowered property values, and threatened the tranquility of the community. I tried reasoning with her. I told her this road wasn't under HOA control, that my property line was legally recorded and I had a surveyor's documentation to prove it. Karen responded by threatening to fine me for trespassing if I even touched the gate. She claimed the HOA had initiated a beautification project and that the new gate was necessary to curb visual pollution. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She had no legal authority to touch my road, let alone restrict my access. But her voice was dripping with the confidence of someone who thought they were untouchable. And honestly, with how HOA politics usually went, she probably believed she was. I drove back down to the gas station at the main intersection just to get cell reception and called the county assessor's office. They confirmed what I already knew. Karen and her HOA had no jurisdiction over my property or the road leading to it. But by the time any official investigation could be launched, I'd be stuck living in town, unable to access my own house. I tried calling the sheriff's department, but all they could do was file an incident report. No criminal offense had occurred yet, and the deputy I spoke to advised me to resolve the matter civilly. That's when I knew I was going to need a lot more than paperwork to get my property back. I booked a motel room in town, sat on the stiff mattress, and stared at the ceiling in disbelief. How did this happen in less than a week? Karen had always been a thorn in everyone's side, sending violation notices for garden gnomes and grilling too close to the sidewalk. But this was next level. I started replaying past confrontations in my head. Like the time she demanded I repaint my barn to better match the community theme, even though my land wasn't even inside the HOA borders. Or the time she tried to have my driveway resloped because it funneled dust toward her tulips. Now, she'd escalated her madness into locking me off my own land. And while I was stewing in frustration, Karen was already bragging about her victory in the HOA group chat, screenshots of which a neighbor anonymously forwarded to me. She called me the grease-stained cowboy who thought his circus truck made him king of the hill. And she added, "Not anymore." The following day I went back to the property, hoping to find someone with a shred of common sense among the HOA board. No such luck. Karen was standing on the other side of the gate, drinking lemonade in a lawn chair like she was hosting a 4th of July parade. When I asked how long she planned to keep the gate up, she said, "As long as it takes to re-establish the neighborhood's dignity." I had to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because the situation was so absurd I didn't know what else to do. A couple of her minions from the board stood by nodding, including a guy who once fined his neighbor for having the wrong shade of mulch. I couldn't make this stuff up. I tried showing them my deed and the surveyor's map again, but Karen dismissed it all as irrelevant until our legal team can review it. What legal team? The HOA's budget barely covered pothole patching and flowerbed. Karen was bluffing, but she was playing the long game, hoping I'd cave. I knew better. I went back to town and called Marcus, one of my oldest friends from the army and now a land use attorney. I sent him photos of the gate, the location coordinates, the documents, and the HOA signs. He called me back an hour later, furious. Not only had they violated property law, but Karen had also filed false easement paperwork with the HOA's logo slapped on it. The gate wasn't just illegal. It was fraudulent. That gave me a sliver of hope. Marcus said he'd start drafting a formal complaint and file it with the county clerk and the zoning board. But lawsuits and government processes took time. Weeks, sometimes months. In the meantime, I was still locked out of my own home. That night, I walked into my rented storage unit on the edge of town, flipped on the light, and stood face to face with Goliath. She looked glorious. Big, mean, unapologetically loud. A statement on 4 wheels. As I stared at her, an idea began to form. A grin slowly crept across my face. If Karen thought a padlock and some chain could keep me out, she clearly didn't understand the laws of physics, or torque, or the fact that Goliath could climb over a school bus without blinking. I didn't act impulsively. I spent the next few days gathering evidence. I installed trail cameras pointed at the fence, recorded time-stamped footage of Karen's security guard standing on my property, and caught footage of an HOA landscaper dumping soil on my driveway to encourage grass growth. Everything was documented. Meanwhile, Marcus got the paperwork moving, and I quietly began prepping Goliath for what was coming. New shocks, oil check, tire pressure, calibrated throttle response, the works. If the legal path failed, I needed an alternate strategy. One that made a statement and left no doubt who owned that land. Karen had made one mistake. She assumed I would take this lying down. That I was just some truck-loving recluse who couldn't outmaneuver a bunch of retirees with clipboards. But what she didn't realize was that I had faced worse than this on desert trails and foreign terrain. And this time, the battlefield was my backyard. She wanted a war? She was about to get one. Goliath style. 2 days after Karen's gate stunt, I found myself sitting in the county clerk's office while Marcus was on speakerphone explaining every legal term that Karen had twisted into her HOA fantasy. We had pulled the plat map again, blown up and framed, clearly showing the access road as part of my private property. Yet here I was, still locked out, still playing by rules that Karen had made up like she was the villain in a backyard soap opera. Marcus said we'd filed the official complaint, but the process was slow. There would be investigations, hearings, maybe even a judge's visit to the site. Karen, meanwhile, acted like she'd won the presidency and conquered the land in a diplomatic takeover. And now she was putting on a show for the world to see. The next morning, I saw the camera van before I saw the crowd. A local news crew had parked just outside the gate, and there she was, Karen, dressed like she was launching a political campaign, speaking passionately into a mic about preserving community elegance and the battle against non-compliant structures. I parked my truck down the hill and walked over slowly, resisting the urge to storm through the crowd. A dozen residents were watching, some half-interested, some smirking. Karen had painted me as the problem. The man with the monstrous truck who polluted their neat little paradise. She didn't expect me to step up beside her mid-speech, holding the land deed in one hand and the surveyor's signature in the other. The reporter's eyebrows shot up. Karen went pale but kept rambling. I calmly explained to the cameras that the road behind the gate was entirely mine, built and maintained by me, and that the gate installation was unauthorized and illegal. Then I looked straight into the camera and said, "If you want to keep your HOA tidy, try keeping it inside your own borders." That clip didn't just make the 6 o'clock news. It went viral online within hours. People from other states started commenting about Karen's antics, some sharing their own horror stories. The tide was shifting, and she could feel it. The very next day, Karen retaliated. I received 3 official-looking envelopes taped to the motel door. Inside were HOA-issued citations totaling over $3,000. One for blocking the community's aesthetic with industrial machinery. Another for not responding to prior HOA communications. And the last, my personal favorite, was a fine for parking agricultural machinery on unapproved terrain, referring to my monster truck. None of them held water legally, but that wasn't the point. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was exhausting me, hoping I'd fold before the real law stepped in. I didn't flinch. Instead, I bought a portable printer and spent the afternoon generating response letters, formal cease and desist notices, and printing evidence. I created a wall in my motel room lined with every email, map, HOA document, and screenshot that proved Karen was making it all up as she went. Later that evening, a neighbor named Drew knocked on my motel room door. He was a quiet guy, lived down the street from Karen. I remembered him from community meetings. Kept to himself, didn't like drama. He stepped in and handed me a flash drive. Said it was footage from his security system. I plugged it into my laptop and there it was. Clear video of 2 HOA landscapers jumping the fence, walking onto my land, and dumping bags of fertilizer and sod along my driveway. Karen had called it a beautification project. I called it trespassing. Even better, one of them said, Karen wants this path green by next week for her next HOA picnic. That footage went right into the evidence pile. Marcus nearly jumped through the phone when I sent it to him. By this point, Karen realized she was losing ground in the legal realm. So she doubled down socially. She sent out an HOA newsletter, the kind no one asked for, where she referred to me only as the outsider. She claimed I threatened the peace, endangered property values, and was resisting important community enhancements. But people were starting to talk, and not in her favor. Kids in the neighborhood began asking me about Goliath when I visited the gas station. One of them asked if I was really going to drive over the gate like in the movies. I just smiled and told them, "Depends how long it stays up." They laughed like it was a joke, but deep down, I wasn't joking. Marcus called that night with good news. The county had agreed to send an inspector within the week. They were also investigating HOA financial records to verify how the gate had been funded and if proper permissions were filed. Spoiler alert, they weren't. Karen had reallocated reserve funds, listed the gate as emergency drainage infrastructure, and signed off under an alias. That alone could disqualify her from holding any HOA office. But again, it was all going to take time. And Karen wasn't slowing down. I had to go check on Goliath. I missed her. That machine wasn't just a truck, it was a statement. A symbol of every hour I'd poured into my garage, every race I'd entered, and every bone-jarring jump I'd landed. She didn't just climb over obstacles. She made them irrelevant. I unlocked the storage unit, flipped on the lights, and stood there for a long moment just staring. I thought about loading her up and paying a visit to that fence right then and there. But I wasn't reckless. I was calculated. And if this was going to be a showdown, it had to be unforgettable. That's when I started the prep work. Not just on Goliath, but on the message. I didn't want this to be a petty feud. I wanted the world to see how far a power-drunk HOA president would go to abuse the rules and punish someone who never even signed up for their little kingdom. I installed a high-def camera mount on the roof of Goliath, added a PA speaker, polished her until the paint sparkled under the lights. I even installed a custom LED sign behind the grill that read, "Private Property Enforcement Unit," as a joke, But the way Goliath looked, no one would dare laugh. She was ready. Back in town, Karen wasn't done putting on her act. She hosted a wine and cheese mixer outside the gate the following weekend. I watched from a distance as she made a toast in front of the locked chain, surrounded by HOA loyalists in matching polos. She actually had the gall to set up folding chairs in front of my block driveway. She called it the reclamation picnic. Someone handed her a microphone. She thanked the HOA members for taking a stand against chaos. I almost respected the level of delusion. Almost. But what Karen didn't see was that I had already taken drone footage of the event, that my cameras were rolling, that every second of her gloating was now part of a legal timeline being assembled piece by piece. I wasn't just waiting, I was building the case. And if Karen thought this story would end with me giving up and moving out, she was in for a brutal reality check. The last piece fell into place when Marcus texted me the official word. The land inspector was arriving on Saturday morning. I set my own schedule for Saturday as well. I would arrive an hour before. With Goliath. Fully prepped. Tires cleaned. Camera rolling. Loudspeaker ready. Karen had no idea that the machine she hated most was about to be her reckoning. She could lie on paper. She could fool a committee. But steel doesn't lie. And Goliath was about to speak the truth with every crushing pound of rubber and metal. The countdown had begun. And I wasn't going to knock. I was going to drive through. Saturday morning loomed like the finale of a long, slow-burn fireworks show. I didn't sleep much the night before. Between the thrum of anticipation and the checklist running through my head, my body was buzzing like Goliath's engine at idle. At exactly 5 a.m., I drove out to the edge of town where my monster truck rested inside the steel-doored storage unit. I unlocked it and threw the doors wide open like I was unveiling a monument. There she was, bathed in the hazy glow of overhead fluorescence, glinting like a metallic beast aching to be unleashed. I climbed into the cab, flicked every switch in the correct sequence, and grinned when her engine roared to life. The deep growl echoed through the lot like thunder across a canyon. She was ready. And so was I. I took my time. Not because I doubted myself, but because I wanted the moment to matter. I mounted the camera on the dash, set the roof GoPro to record continuously, and ran the mic check for the loudspeaker. Then I did a systems check. Pressure was perfect. Transmission smooth. Suspension reactive. She was a machine built for crushing junkyards and crawling vertical terrain. A wrought iron gate didn't stand a chance. But this wasn't about wreckage. It was about message. Every inch Goliath moved would echo with the truth, that no HOA, no matter how overzealous, had the right to steal someone's land and dignity under the banner of fake rules. Just after 7, I rumbled toward the property line. As I crested the hill, the view opened up, and what I saw made me bark out a laugh. Karen had doubled down. The gate was still there, of course, but now it had reinforcements. 2 extra steel beams had been welded across the frame, and what looked like 3 new padlocks glinted in the morning sun. Standing beside it, sipping a latte with both hands wrapped around a custom HOA mug, was Karen in her full Saturday glory. She was dressed in khakis and a pastel cardigan, hair perfectly sprayed in place, and an expression so smug it nearly cracked her foundation. Next to her stood a man who had no business being near a badge but wore one anyway. He was tall, mustached, wearing black sunglasses and a patch that said Community Security Enforcement. His name was Doug, and he looked like someone who once got rejected from mall cop training and never recovered. I rolled up just far enough for the gate and everyone behind it to be fully visible from my dashcam. I brought Goliath to a perfect stop, let the engine rumble a little louder, then activated the speaker. My voice echoed out across the field, even startling a few birds from a nearby tree. I said, slowly and clearly, "This is private property. This gate is an unlawful obstruction. You have 60 seconds to remove yourselves from the roadway before I proceed with removal." The silence that followed was thick and sharp. Karen blinked. Doug puffed his chest like he thought I was bluffing. The neighbors began gathering on porches and lawns, like spectators at a Coliseum match. It was quiet, but not for long. Karen raised her megaphone and shouted back, "You will not proceed with anything. You are trespassing on HOA-maintained easement property, and this is your final warning." I almost pitied her. Almost. I gave them 30 more seconds, during which Doug actually tried to block Goliath by standing directly in its path. I turned on the headlights and revved the engine. He jumped out of the way so fast he nearly tripped over his own boot. The crowd chuckled. Some even cheered. Karen, red-faced and visibly sweating now, barked into her radio, calling someone named Jillian for backup. There would be no backup. With everything rolling, I shifted Goliath into gear and slowly moved forward. The tires crunched over gravel and past the painted HOA boundary line Karen had installed last week. I wasn't speeding. This wasn't recklessness. This was justice in motion. Goliath pressed into the gate with a low metallic groan. At first, nothing gave way. Then the beams began to bend, whining as the steel fought back and lost. One of the padlocks snapped clean off and flew into the air like a slingshot. The crowd gasped. Goliath didn't stop. The second padlock exploded into sparks as the pressure crumpled the support bar. Then came the final padlock. Karen screamed something unintelligible, possibly a curse, possibly an attempt to recite HOA bylaws. Goliath surged forward and the entire gate folded beneath her like cardboard. The iron bars twisted, crashed, and crumbled. The freshly planted bushes and HOA lawn decorations were flattened beneath the massive treads as if they were never there. I hit the horn once. The sound boomed across the neighborhood like a foghorn, echoing victory. Karen stood frozen, eyes wide, lips trembling. Doug was already gone, retreating to his Prius with his badge tucked under his jacket. The crowd was erupting, some with cheers, some with gasps, and some filming with phones shaking in their hands. Once Goliath cleared the remains of the gate, I stopped just short of my property line, shifted her into park, and climbed down. I walked toward Karen as the cameras recorded every step. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I handed her an envelope containing the official land use complaint, the county's preliminary findings, and a cease and desist. Her hand trembled as she took it. I told her calmly, "The sheriff will be here soon, along with the county inspector. I suggest you wait." Then I turned, walked back to Goliath, and drove her slowly and proudly up my driveway for the first time in weeks. It felt like reclaiming more than just land. It felt like restoring my very identity. 15 minutes later, the sheriff's truck pulled up, followed closely by a car with the county seal on the door. The inspector, a woman named Callie, stepped out and looked at the remains of the gate with a small smirk. She asked a few questions, walked the perimeter with her clipboard, and then called Karen over. I couldn't hear the full exchange, but by Karen's hunched posture and furious hand gestures, it was clear things weren't going her way. The sheriff approached me, gave a nod, and simply said, "Looks like they crossed more than just a property line." I nodded back, watching Karen storm off mid-conversation and head to her house, slamming the door hard enough to shake the shutters. That evening, the footage went online. Marcus posted a trimmed version with background music and a bold title. HOA locked me out, my monster truck had other plans. It spread like wildfire. Within 24 hours, we had 500,000 views. Within 72, it had hit local and national media circuit. Everyone had an opinion, but most agreed on one thing. Karen had taken things way too far, and Goliath had delivered poetic justice. Even people who hated monster trucks admitted it was satisfying. Karen tried to claim it was all vandalism, but the legal paperwork had already been filed and time-stamped. Her claims didn't hold. The next day, I found an anonymous gift at my door. It was a custom-made sign shaped like a stop sign that read, "Karen's Gate, crushed by Goliath, R.I.P." I laughed harder than I had in weeks. It wasn't over yet, but the tide had turned. Karen had been humiliated in front of her own kingdom, her iron symbol flattened like a tin can. And I was back on my land, where I belonged. Goliath, parked like a sentinel beside my house, stood ready. Because with someone like Karen, the next round was always just one clipboard away. By the time Monday morning rolled around, the wreckage of the gate had already become something of a neighborhood landmark. People walked their dogs past it just to gawk, pointing and whispering like it was a sculpture in a museum. A few folks even took selfies next to the mangled steel, though some did so cautiously, afraid Karen might leap out from behind a bush and start screeching about community image. But she didn't. Karen had gone dark. Her blinds stayed closed, her car never moved from the driveway, and she hadn't posted a single thing in the HOA newsletter since the incident. The silence, honestly, was more unnerving than her usual tantrums. It meant she was planning something. I spent the next few days cleaning up my driveway and rechecking my property lines with the county surveyor, who visited in person this time and confirmed everything Marcus had submitted was accurate. The inspector Callie sent in her official report, too, noting that the HOA had violated 2 zoning regulations and a property boundary statute. Karen's name was specifically mentioned in the final paragraph. That was going to sting. Meanwhile, Goliath stood parked in her usual spot beside my garage, still covered in camera gear, still caked with the last remnants of dust from the gate showdown. I hadn't even washed her yet. It felt wrong to scrub away the evidence of what she'd accomplished. Then came the email. Karen resurfaced not through a public outburst or another lawnside press conference, but through a cold, passive-aggressive message titled, HOA Property Restoration Plan Phase 2. It was a PDF attachment sent to every resident in the area. In it, Karen proposed expanding the community's aesthetic improvement program, which now included installing buffering foliage along any properties deemed visually disruptive to the communal vibe. She included a map with red highlighted lot. Mine was circled 3 times. She didn't name me, but she didn't have to. She called it Community Protection Against Visual Aggression. I just about choked on my coffee. Marcus read it and immediately flagged several terms as legal misrepresentations. Buffering foliage wasn't just a fancy name for hedges. It was a sneaky way of trying to claim parts of my land again. I walked the edge of my driveway that night and found tiny pink survey flags stuck into the dirt. They hadn't even bothered hiding them. Karen had sent landscapers, again, to stake out her next move. I pulled every flag up, tied them into a neat little bundle, and taped them to her HOA mailbox with a note that simply read, "Wrong property." Again. I never saw anyone pick them up, but the bundle was gone the next day. I knew then that she hadn't learned a thing. The gate may have been flattened, the county may have backed me up, and the internet might have laughed her into hiding, but Karen wasn't done. Not even close. I decided I needed to do more than just wait for her to strike again. I needed to make a statement that didn't just undo her nonsense, but completely dismantled her illusion of control. It had to be something no one would forget. I went back into my garage and started planning. Over the years, I'd built more than just Goliath. I had a few other machines and odd projects tucked away, but nothing as symbolic or powerful. Goliath was different. She was part of me. So I figured, why not use her again? This time not as a wrecking ball, but as a parade float. I decided to host a public neighborhood barbecue on my property, fully permitted, fully documented, and fully legal. And Goliath would be the centerpiece. But not just standing still. She would drive slowly around the edge of my land during the event, like a mobile monument to HOA resistance. I called it the Freedom Lap. I applied for a temporary event notice with the county, and to their credit, they approved it quickly. I even invited the sheriff's office and the local fire department, both of whom remembered Karen's Gate very well and were more than happy to stop by for burgers. I hung up flyers, sent out digital invites, and made sure every neighbor, even the ones who had previously sided with Karen, knew they were welcome. I didn't mention her by name once. I didn't need to. Everyone already knew the story. and now they'd see the ending. The morning of the barbecue, I fired up Goliath and gave her a long overdue cleaning. I mounted a small platform on the back with a folding flag and a sign that read, "Private Property, Public Spirit." I parked her in the driveway just as the first wave of neighbors started arriving. People brought their kids, lawn chairs, drinks, and side dishes. A few of them sheepishly apologized for staying quiet during the gate debacle. I told them all the same thing, no grudges. Just burgers and good company. About halfway through the afternoon, I climbed into Goliath, started the engine, and took the slowest, most deliberate lap around the edge of my property. I stuck strictly to my land, never crossing a line. The crowd clapped and cheered. Some of the kids chanted her name. Not Karen. Goliath. Karen's blinds remained closed, but I saw the sliver of movement behind one of them. She was watching, and I hoped she realized that this time the neighborhood wasn't laughing at me. They were laughing with me. And at her. Later that evening, just as the sun was setting, the sheriff pulled me aside and handed me a copy of the county violation issued to the HOA. It detailed Karen's misuse of community funds for unauthorized construction, specifically citing the gate and the landscaping incursions. A fine was pending and a hearing was scheduled. I smiled and tucked it into my glove box. Not because I needed it anymore, but because it was proof. Tangible, undeniable proof that no matter how loud Karen shouted or how many fake titles she printed on her letterhead, she couldn't rewrite the law. That night, as people packed up and headed home, a few stuck around to help clean. One neighbor, a retired teacher named Ellen, patted my shoulder and said, "You made this place feel like a neighborhood again." It hit me harder than I expected, because that's what Karen had stolen all along. It wasn't just about land, fences, or paperwork. It was about the right to belong without fear. The right to not be bullied by someone who thought a clipboard made her a queen. After everyone had gone, I sat on the tailgate of my work truck with a soda in hand and Goliath gleaming beside me. The stars were coming out. The air was cool. And the property was quiet, the way I remembered it before Karen turned it into a circus. I knew she'd try something else eventually. People like her always did. But now she was exposed. No more secret vote. No more surprise gate. The neighborhood had seen what she was really about. And the next time she tried to wrap her iron grip around someone else's land, there would be resistance. I leaned back, cracked my knuckles, and smiled to myself. It wasn't just a comeback. It was a warning shot. And if Karen thought the story ended here, she had no idea how many gears I still had left to shift. The week after the barbecue felt like a calm after a storm, but it wasn't the kind that settles everything down. It was the eerie stillness, the one that warned you more was brewing just beneath the surface. Karen hadn't made a move in days, but I knew better than to assume she was finished. She wasn't the type to walk away quietly. Her pride had taken a beating, her reputation was in shambles, and now even her own HOA board was turning against her. That alone made her dangerous. But while she stewed behind her floral curtains, I focused on solidifying my win. Marcus filed a formal reimbursement request for the damages to my driveway and property, citing not just illegal gate construction, but harassment, trespass, and intentional obstruction. The hearing was set, and if all went well, Karen and her little HOA crew would be on the hook for several thousand in damages. Then came the surprise that shifted the whole game. A letter from the county commission arrived at my door. Inside was a notification that the HOA's charter was under full review due to multiple violations of zoning law and misuse of community funds. If found guilty, the HOA could be stripped of several enforcement privileges, including the right to issue fines and control shared infrastructure. It was the equivalent of defanging a snake that had bitten too many times. Karen had not only overreached, she'd brought the whole organization under a spotlight they clearly weren't ready for. Marcus was practically giddy when I called him to read the letter aloud. It meant the HOA wasn't just being slapped on the wrist, it was being reeled in. Despite the pressure closing in on her from every angle, Karen wasn't done yet. I found out through another anonymous tip. Someone on the board leaked her newest plan. She was rallying the remaining loyalists to call an emergency vote to remove several neutral board members and replace them with her hand-picked lackeys. Her goal was to regain full control and then countersue me for property defamation and community sabotage. I couldn't help but laugh. Property defamation? What did that even mean? But I also knew I couldn't underestimate how manipulative she could be. So I prepared. I gathered every document, every time-stamped video, every neighbor's statement, and every official correspondence from the sheriff, the inspector, and the county. I printed them all out and placed them in a massive binder labeled Exhibit A. I sent digital copies to the county and Marcus. Then I made 3 backup drives and hid them in separate places on my property. I wasn't just ready for another hearing, I was ready for a war tribunal. When the emergency HOA meeting finally took place, it wasn't the secret coup Karen had hoped for. Someone leaked the location, and a half-dozen residents, including Ellen and Drew, showed up uninvited but legally entitled to observe. Karen tried to push a vote to reinstate her as sole controller of enforcement, but the board had had enough. They shut her down, refusing to even second her motions. One of the former fence supporters, a man named Harold, stood up and publicly apologized for backing her during the gate debacle. He admitted he'd been misled and manipulated. That was the moment I knew Karen's reign was finally crumbling. It wasn't an explosion. It was a slow implosion, piece by piece, from the inside out. But even with her power dwindling, Karen still had one final tantrum left in her. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of tires spinning outside my driveway. When I stepped out, I found her SUV parked halfway across my entrance, angled just enough to block Goliath from leaving the property. She stood beside it in a bathrobe, arms crossed, as if daring me to call the police. I didn't say a word. I walked back into the garage, climbed into Goliath, and rolled her forward inch by inch until the front bumper nudged her rear fender. She jumped back, screaming that I was threatening her safety. I turned on the loudspeaker and said, very clearly, "You have 10 seconds to move your vehicle before I call the sheriff and file another obstruction charge." She moved. By that afternoon, word of her stunt had reached the remaining board members, and by the evening, I received confirmation that she had been formally removed from all HOA leadership roles. She was no longer president. She was no longer allowed to represent the community. And best of all, her access to the HOA's official email, documents, and funds was revoked immediately. The sheriff served her the final paperwork the next day. I didn't even have to show up. She tried to argue, but the law had caught up with her, and there was no HOA loophole left for her to crawl through. The best part came a week later when a new community bulletin went out, this time not authored by Karen, but by a fresh interim president named Naomi, a kind and level-headed woman who'd lived there for 20 years and never once caused trouble. In her message, Naomi apologized on behalf of the HOA, confirmed that all gate-related fines and citations against me were formally withdrawn, and invited me to speak at a town hall meeting about how future conflicts could be resolved with transparency and respect. I declined the speech but agreed to attend. The meeting was peaceful, even productive, and not once did Karen's name come up. She wasn't at the meeting, of course. Word had spread that her house was up for sale. A big, red, "For Sale by Owner" sign had gone up in her yard, and rumor had it she was moving to a gated community across the county line. Somewhere she could have stricter rules and a new group of people to micromanage. I passed by one evening and saw her packing boxes. She saw me too. Our eyes locked for a second, and though she didn't say a word, the look on her face wasn't anger anymore. It was defeat. She knew she'd lost. Not just her position, not just her control, but her status. She was no longer feared, no longer admired, no longer obeyed. She was just Karen now. I spent that evening back on my land, sitting on the edge of my driveway with Goliath parked beside me like a guard dog at rest. The air was calm again. No pink survey flags. No strange construction noise. No HOA spies creeping around. Just peace. I looked around at everything I'd fought for, not just my rights but my place in this neighborhood. The victory wasn't just personal. It was communal. People had finally seen what unchecked power looked like. And they stood up. Not just for me, but for the idea that no one should be bullied off their own property, no matter how big their truck is or how loud their engine roars. Goliath didn't have to move another inch. She'd already made her point. The gate was gone, the false rules dismantled, and the person behind it all finally unseated. And me? I was home again. For good. With nothing left to prove, and no gate left to crush.